A second female Prime Minister for Britain. But who will it be?
Andrea Leadsom, 84 votes. Theresa May, 199 votes. Therefore, Michael Gove, having the lowest number of votes, has been eliminated from the ballot.
The Tories already have a female leader, of course, in Scotland. We'll talk to her tonight.
I really don't have any message for that monster. He basically took away a person who was peaceful, who wanted unity in the world, who wanted the communities to unite.
Also tonight, we explore the links that the killer of this man had with international Islamist extremists. And we've seen the headlines, but what lies buried deep within the pages of the Chilcot report?
Well, I'll be delving into this, extracting the tale of one particularly murky episode.
And novelist Robert Harris explores the many lives of his former friend, Tony Blair.
He often wore makeup. I mean, even when he wasn't in a television studio. I don't know why. I suppose maybe it just appealed to him, that sense of sort of always being a performer.
And then there were two. Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom will duke it out to lead the Conservative Party and, of course, the nation after the final round of voting by MPs saw Justice Secretary Michael Gove limp home in third place. Now, I would have described this as a massive shock once, but given the unprecedented political upheaval of the last fortnight, Mrs Leadsom's presence on the ballot, not to mention the absence of a Johnson or an Osborne, barely raises an eyebrow. It all means not only that the next Prime Minister will be a woman, but also that we won't have a firm hand on the country's tiller until the second week of September. Newsnight's political editor Nick Watt is with me now. Nick.
Well, as you were saying, James, an emphatic win for Theresa May there. She gets nearly 200 votes and 60% of Tory MPs think she should be Prime Minister. And she will face in that final round Andrea Leadsom. She saw her vote share increase to 84 votes. That's 25% of the total. Michael Gove, third place, humiliating result for him because his vote share actually went down and he is therefore disqualified from the contest.
Theresa May's team as confident as the numbers suggest they should be?
Well, on paper, Theresa May should walk this, but no, her team are nervous. They think that Andrea Leadsom, as the Brexit campaigner, could run an insurgency campaign. Some ministers are saying that she is connecting in their constituencies. And one cabinet minister I spoke to said that if Andrea Leadsom ends up as Prime Minister with just 25% of Conservative MPs supporting her, the Conservatives could have a Jeremy Corbyn situation.
You called it a humiliation for Michael Gove. Any word on how he's taken it?
Michael Gove is licking his wounds, and the word out of his camp tonight is that he's really hurt at the end of this week, in which he cannot escape from that image as being the double assassin. What they're saying is he's not going to be cutting any deals. He is going to accept a cabinet post if he's offered it. If he's not offered it, then he will not brood and think, when can I return? But the big dilemma for him is, what does he do? Who does he endorse? He said it needs to be a Brexiteer as our next Prime Minister, but Andrea Leadsom does not share his worldview. Anyway, we thought we'd take a look at Andrea Leadsom, but I should just warn that my report does contain some flash photography.
I can now announce the result of the election for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Will it be third time lucky for the plucky outsider in the Conservative leadership contest? Andrea Leadsom has not even made it to the cabinet, but she is now within reach of the premiership after making it to the final stage of the battle to choose David Cameron's successor.
What do we want? Leadsom for leader! When do we want it? Now!
The Energy Minister has a Eurosceptic fan base on the right of the party after playing a leading role on the Brexit side in the referendum campaign. And today, Leadsom showed she will run an insurgency campaign by instructing her supporters to march on Whitehall, though she didn't trouble it with her presence. Concerns are being raised that Andrea Leadsom's lack of cabinet experience could make her something of a novice as Prime Minister. Opponents are also pointing to her socially conservative views, which prompted her today to highlight her unease about same-sex marriage.
Because she decided to abstain, on the subject of same-sex marriage does not in any way make her less respectful of loving couples who just happen to be in a same-sex relationship. Look, we've moved on. Get over it.
Leadsom, who has so far escaped scrutiny as a relatively junior minister, is now finding that her CV is under the spotlight. Shortly after her election to Parliament in 2010, she burnished her track record in the city to MPs.
I should declare I have been in banking even longer than my honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, having been 23 years in investment banking and funds management.
Now it turns out that during a 10-year stint at Invesco Perpetual, Leadsom only had official approval to deal with funds for 3 months. Theresa May's supporters say she is a safer pair of hands.
I think what people want is somebody who can bring not only the party together, but the country together. And I think the result today has demonstrated that Theresa has that ability. It's no time for a risk.
Andrea Leadsom's friends are hurt by the attacks on her record and what they regard as a rather sneering attitude to her membership of Parliament's Bible study group. They say her Christianity lies at the root of her plain-speaking approach to politics and explains why she takes great pride in delivering on her promises. With this background, her team have high hopes that Leadsom will go down as a major figure in British political history.
This candidate of ours can outstrip Margaret Thatcher. She is the real deal. She is absolutely fantastic, and you ain't seen nothing yet.
Would Theresa May outstrip Lady Thatcher?
I don't think any of us would want to make that comparison.
Theresa May's camp are nervously watching the newcomer, but they hope that the Home Secretary's overwhelming support amongst MPs will send a message to grassroots Tories tempted to vote with their hearts for a leading Brexit campaigner.
You have to remember in 2001 it was very close. There were a handful of votes between the different candidates. This is 2.5 times as many votes for Theresa as her nearest rival. And so my message to the membership is please think long and hard about the decision you take.
British politics has been undergoing a rollercoaster ride in recent months. It is now over to Tory members to decide whether something of the old order is re-established.
I'm hopeful, optimistic, yes.
Or whether Britain will venture out of the EU with a true but untested believer.
And we're joined now from our Edinburgh studio by Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, who earlier today announced that she would be backing Theresa May for Prime Minister. Michael Gove, Ruth, I know he's not the force that he was a fortnight ago, but he said that the successful candidate must be on the winning side of the argument. Theresa May wasn't. Gove's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, I think it's got to be someone that can unite both the country and the party, and I think Theresa May is the only one that can do that. She's already got the vast majority of the parliamentary party behind her. She's got huge support in all parts of the country, and my colleagues in Scotland, both in the Commons and the Lords, our MEP, myself and Holyrood, all 4 of us in those leadership positions are backing her. And we also need to talk about some of the divides in our country, and that includes the divide between those privileged few and those people like me that went to, the local comprehensive, people like Theresa May who can speak to that and wants to make sure that government is for everybody in this country and not for those people that feel so far removed from the corridors of power.
Theresa May went to grammar school, I think. So did Andrea Leadsom. Why can't she unite the party or indeed the country?
Well, I think there's going to be an awful lot of challenges that come up. This is not going to be an easy few years for whoever takes on the mantle in number 10.
I'm going to have to... We haven't got a great deal of time. Why can't Andrea Leadsom unite the country or the Conservative Party?
Well, we've already seen she hasn't got a plurality of the parliamentary party behind her. She hasn't got support within the parliamentary party up here in Scotland and in other parts of the country. But, I'm not here to criticise Conservative colleagues. It takes a lot of guts to put your name on a ballot paper. It takes a lot of guts to say that you want to lead. And I want to see, a big, broad debate happening right across the UK and all of the hustings that are planned for the 2 leaderships. It's right that our membership gets their say. But I think in terms of the person that's got the steel for the job, that can go eyeball to eyeball with Angela Merkel and Nicola Sturgeon, it can only be Theresa May.
Very briefly, on the day that David Cameron resigned, who in your gut did you think would be the next Prime Minister?
Theresa May.
What do you think she was talking about when she described the nasty party?
She was talking about the view that people used to have of us. She was talking about that when she was the chairwoman of the party. She's held a lot of big roles within our party, and she's done a lot of work within our country. I know when, anytime I wanted to call on her before the independence referendum to come up, whether that was to make speeches, to talk to some of Scotland's female businesswomen and entrepreneurs, to raise money, she was there in a heartbeat, anything that she could do. She's got a huge capacity for work. She's got all the leadership skills. She can see the way other people have looked at the Tory party and not like what they've seen, and they know the way in which she wants to change the party, so it's a party for everybody, not a party just for one section of society.
Can you put some flesh on those bones for me? Give me an example of the sort of ideas or indeed ideologies that you would have filed under nasty.
Well, I think if you look at the way in which we had spoken in the past, and I think we should remember that I actually wasn't a member of the party way back in the days that she was talking about that. I was still a journalist for the BBC, being neutral like you are now. But, she was talking about the way in which often our opponents have thought that we only spoke to one section when actually we're a very broad church. I know in my first election, when I stood as a candidate in Michael Martin, the former Speaker, the disgraced Speaker of the House of Commons, in the by-election, I was being told that Margaret Thatcher shut the rail yards in that constituency when actually they'd shut well before she came to any sort of prominence and power, and they shut not because of industrial policy but because they made steam locomotives when the world had moved on to diesel. So there's been a lot of myths that have been perpetrated about our party by our opponents, and it's time to break down some of those barriers. And I think having two state-educated women by merit without quotas or quandaries have helped, will help address some of that.
This isn't a myth. This is something Theresa May has said. She's declined to guarantee that the residents in this country, the continuing lives in this country of some 3 million EU migrants were already here. Why do you think she did that?
She says that she wants to be able to guarantee them and seek guarantees for Brits living abroad in the EU. I actually want her to do one without the other. I've publicly said that I think she should give that guarantee.
Why do you think she hasn't?
Well, I think that she's, she knows that if she takes on this role, she's got a lot of work to do in making sure that Brits abroad are being looked after and are told that they're allowed to stay as well. But actually, I think that, the person in that role should be able to say, irrespective of that they should stay. And, the one thing that David Cameron will tell you over the last 5 years is that while I'm a very supportive colleague, when I disagree, I'll say, and they'll know about it.
Do you know what her Brexit vision is? Does it involve the single market, the EEA? Have you had a conversation with her?
I have had a conversation with her, and I said that for me, what I want to see for Scotland is access to that single market. I think that's important for Scottish business. I think I want to see, it's important for lots of sectors. I also want to see passporting for our financial services, and I want to see the very best deal for Scotland's fishermen. There's a lot of sectors that have very specific interests, and we need someone who's a hard negotiator, who's tough, who's steely, who can go toe-to-toe with the big players in Europe, who already has contacts in Europe with all the interior ministers that, like Theresa May does. And while I think that Andrea Leadsom has a huge, bright future in the party and, has done incredibly well, I've been up against her in debates and she's a talented woman, I think it's someone that can hit the ground running on day one, and that can only be Theresa May.
Hit the ground running but not offer any meaningful reduction in immigration under that analysis?
Well, look, I think that there's got to be a discussion about that. Clearly, there was a lot of discussion at the end of the campaign.
Just a discussion or an actual policy?
Well, look, I think that, there's going to have to be a lot of work done, not just on the framework that the UK government takes forward.
But at the end of that work, what will the policy look like?
Well, also on what is on the table from the other 27 nations. And, I don't think that you can criticise anybody that wants to assume the top job for wanting to, keep their cards close to their chest before they go over to Europe to negotiate.
You'll forgive me for not having congratulated you sooner, Ruth, but you got engaged on the 23rd of May. Andrea Leadsom described herself today as unhappy with the legislation that would allow you to marry your girlfriend. How does that make you feel?
Well, I have to say that I was a huge proponent of same-sex marriage. In fact, there's still parts of the UK where that's not permitted. I've been invited by Amnesty to go over and give the annual Pride lecture in Belfast in August.
Do you want to be part of a party led by a woman who's unhappy about the fact that you can marry your fiancé in a church?
Well, this is my party. I'm in the Conservative Party, and I'm very happy that there are people who've been huge proponents of it. And Theresa May was actually, even Lynn Featherstone, the Liberal Democrat minister who worked with her,
we're talking about the candidate that isn't a huge supporter of it. I'm wondering how that makes you feel. Is it a crisis of conscience, a political crisis, or just water off a duck's back?
I have to say, I don't know Andrea Leadsom very well. I think she said that it was something to do with her faith. As a woman of faith myself, who's talked openly about their Christianity and some of the difficulties that I've had in my past having to reconcile my faith and my sexuality, I know that it can take some time for some people to do that. But I'm very pleased that Theresa May was instrumental in bringing forward same-sex marriage. It's something that I've supported going forward. And, whoever becomes Prime Minister, they'll get an invitation to my wedding when it happens.
Ruth Davidson, many thanks indeed. And when that happy day dawns, I hope it is wonderful for you. The murder of Glasgow shopkeeper Asad Shah on the 24th of March this year sent shockwaves through the Shorelands area of the city and saw hundreds take to the streets for a vigil in his honour. Today, his killer pled guilty to murder at Glasgow's High Court. But why would someone kill a man described by his family and his local community as caring, as generous and as peaceful? Secunda Kamani has been speaking exclusively to the victim's brother and can report new details on the murder, including how it's linked to another high-profile killing in Pakistan.
A well-loved British-Pakistani shopkeeper, Asad Shah, is brutally murdered by another Muslim. A community, a family, are left asking why. Initially, tabloids linked the murder to a Facebook post hours before his death, where Asad wished everyone a happy Easter. Others said it was because he belonged to the persecuted Ahmadiyya sect of Islam. But the truth was more complicated. This is the story of a murder that was planned in Bradford, carried out here in Glasgow, but inspired by events in Pakistan. It ties together the killing of a Scottish shopkeeper with the killing of a Pakistani politician 5 years ago. Both victims accused by some Muslims of having committed blasphemy. Today in court, Asad Shah's killer pled guilty to murder, claiming he was defending Islam.
I wouldn't call him a man. I really don't have any message for that monster. He basically took away a person who was peaceful, who wanted unity in the world, who wanted the communities to unite, who wanted to help the community, and him harming someone of peace is literally, he's the enemy of humanity.
On the 24th of March, Asad Shah had been working in his family's shop when he was brutally attacked. After stabbing him to death, his killer, who had travelled 200 miles from Bradford, calmly waited at a bus stop opposite for the police.
He always put...
Asad's brother witnessed the attack but still finds it too difficult to talk about. He told me his father had brought the family to Scotland in the 90s from Pakistan to escape religious intolerance.
Us being Ahmadis, his pharmacy was set on fire by the extremists there, and his hospital was burnt down, and we had an apartment above the pharmacy where my parents were with the kids. It was set on fire. My dad thought about our future, and he thought, we'd be safer in Britain. Unimaginable. That's what's happened to my brother, and it was my dad trying to protect all the kids, thinking something like this would happen in Pakistan, and it's happened here.
The name of... But it seems Asad wasn't targeted for his Ahmadi faith, but because of videos he was posting online, recorded in his shop, but discussing his spiritual beliefs. In some, he claims to be a prophet himself. One of those who watched the videos and who was incensed by them was 32-year-old Tanveer Ahmed, a minicab driver from Bradford who would go on to murder Asad Shah. Tanveer Ahmed was a fervent admirer of another killer, Mumtaz Qadri, who had murdered a prominent liberal Pakistani politician because he was proposing to reform Pakistan's controversial blasphemy laws. Qadri was executed earlier this year, but many in Pakistan held him up as a hero, who in their view defended the honour of the Prophet. Thousands turned out for his funeral. Qadri's brother says Tanveer Ahmed had talked to him about Glasgow shopkeeper Asad Shah.
तनवीर कादरी साहब बहुत अपसेट थे और वो कहते थे कि ये शख्स तो जितना जल्द हो जाए ये जो है इस दुनिया से वासले जहन्नम हो जाए तो ये माशरे के लिए अच्छा है.
Photo tributes online portray the two killers together. Qadri's brother says Tanveer Ahmed had seen Mumtaz Qadri in a dream before the murder and was inspired by his example.
उन्होंने ये ख्वाब सुनाया कि जब कि मैंने गाजी साहब को ख्वाब में देखा, वो मेरे पास आके बैठते हैं, मुझे प्यार करते हैं, कहते हैं अल्लाह पाक तुमसे दीन का काम लेंगे.
Tanveer Ahmed wasn't the only person in Britain to admire Mumtaz Qadri. A number of mosques, including some in Bradford and Glasgow, expressed support for him, even if they haven't for Tanveer Ahmed. Both Tanveer Ahmed and Mumtaz Qadri came from a strand of Islam that's normally associated with a spiritual, liberal interpretation of religion, one that completely opposes Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But the murders they committed upsets the simplistic narrative that defines some sects as inherently violent, others peaceful. Extremism, it seems, is much more complicated. Tonight, Tanveer Ahmed faces a lengthy jail sentence, but even from behind bars, he seems able to spread his messages. This posting on Facebook appears to be him sending supporters Eid greetings earlier this week, although we haven't been able to verify it. The message ends with a chilling slogan. The penalty for those who insult the Prophet? Cut their heads from their bodies. The man who murdered your brother, he said he did so because he was defending the honour of the Prophet Muhammad, because he says your brother was claiming to be a prophet.
Muhammad would have done anything like that. I think it's very, very clear when you look at the history. He didn't resort to violence and things like this.
Assad Shah's family have been torn apart by the murder. They want to preserve his memory, but are in fear of their lives.
It's been very difficult for the family, and the family they don't feel safe anymore living here in Scotland, and it has split the family apart since the incident, and some members of the family have, they've left Scotland or are in the process of leaving, and it really shouldn't have come to this.
Sekunda Kamani reporting. Now, in the last few years, the word whatever and its youthful abbreviation whatevs have become bywords for banality, the stock response of the uninterested to tidings about which they couldn't care less. Strange then that Tony Blair's employment of it in a 2002 missive to George W. Bush, "I will be with you whatever," has proved to be the most important of all 2.6 million words in the Chilcot report. But we can't be sure of that quite yet because we haven't read them all. That plum job's fallen to Newsnight's diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, who's now had 36 hours with a tome 3 times the length of the Bible. Mark, what have you found?
Well, look, I've done a deep dive into volume 8 here. There are all manner of different stories of different aspects of this, and you can take your pick, really. And the reason I've chosen to tell this story tonight is because it is a pretty extraordinary tale. Like many of the other things, aspects of this were already in the public domain. The idea that Britain's exit from Iraq, from Basra, was subject to some sort of deal. And indeed, here it is in all its sordid detail, how after years of trying to bring peace to the streets of Basra and failing, the British Army and MI6 ended up talking to a jailed militia commander in a cell on the outskirts of Basra.
See the tallest building? He's up there.
In mid-2007, after operations to hit the Shia militias, the British military tried a new tack. They opened discussions with a senior Jaish al-Mahdi, or JAM, commander that they'd arrested 2 years before. In Chilcot, the prisoner is called Jam 1. A memo on the 15th of June notes,
Major General Shaw was content to test Jam 1's ability to influence Jam on the basis that a short suspension of strike operations and the release of some detainees fitted fortuitously with existing plans.
They came up with a trial deal. British arrest operations would stop, a couple of militia prisoners be released, and Jam 1 would demonstrate his ability to deliver a reduction in violence. The secret talks came at an awkward time, just as the British military wanted to hand Basra over to the Iraqi forces and pull back to the airport outside the city. The Americans had spent that summer doing the opposite, surging forces and re-entering many areas. But the British wanted out.
The security situation was difficult for us. Every move outside our bases required detailed planning and was high risk. And I thought that we were having limited effect on improving the security situation in Basra. 90% of the violence was directed against us. Politically, there was no contact between us and the local provincial government. Coalition-sponsored reconstruction had almost ceased.
An MOD civil servant wrote that pulling out of Basra city created
a serious risk of major damage to US-UK relations across a range of security issues.
The British, though, had started to roll over the deals with their captive, Jam 1, from 1 month to the next, each time releasing more Iraqi militia prisoners. One MOD civil servant told the Defence Secretary,
"We face risks of accusations that we have done deals with terrorists, which may reinforce some of the negative comments emerging from the US in recent weeks, alleging that we are not in control of events in southeast Iraq and are seeking an early exit."
Covered by their deal, the British pulled out of their main downtown Basra base early in September. The Americans were seething and accused the British of leaving Iraqis to the mercy of the militias, a charge one Chilcot witness rejected.
Yes, I think it is unfair. As you heard from the General, we consolidated at the airport as part of a planned and coherent transition from coalition lead to Iraqi lead responsibility for security. As I said, the local Iraqi commanders, the government of Iraq and the coalition all agreed with the approach and the timings. So, yeah, I think it is unfair.
A Joint Intelligence Committee report showed the steep fall in attacks on British forces as a result of the deal and speculated about a broader agreement with the militias. Their prisoner, Jam 1, asked to be on the next tranche of prisoner releases. Time was running out. By the end of 2007, Jam 1, who the Chilcot report doesn't name, but we know to have been Ahmed al-Fartusi, was released. And in the final months of the British presence, violence picked up again. It reached a peak in March 2008, when Iraqi forces engaged in a full-scale battle, while for some days the British hung back at the airport and American advisors went into Basra to help restore the situation. It all added to the sense of an ignominious end to the mission.
Mark Urban there. It will, of course, take years for the full impact of the Chilcot report into the Iraq war to be properly measured. Yesterday, as the man at its heart responded to its publication, it took mere moments for talk to turn to the demeanour and even the sanity of Tony Blair. They are, though, subjects which have long exercised the author Robert Harris. Once a close friend of the former Prime Minister, it's fair to say they'd fallen out by the time Harris published his 2010 novel, The Ghost, featuring a thinly disguised Blair facing trial for war crimes. In this film, Robert Harris considers his former friend's fall from grace.
I first met Tony Blair in 1992, just before John Major beat Neil Kinnock in that general election. And my overwhelming impression, I'd never met him before, he was then Labour's employment spokesman. I was a columnist on the Sunday Times. He was, above all, refreshingly normal. He always talked as if he was separate from the politics in a funny way. He'd empathise with someone outside politics and he'd say, I don't know why I'm doing this, you know, we don't seem to be going anywhere. I don't know why I just don't give it all up and go and practice as a barrister and spend more time with Cherie and the kids. One cannot underestimate the importance of that quality in Tony Blair with what made the 1997 election possible. I was with him in his constituency home, in his sitting room, standing with him at 10 o'clock on election night when the exit poll was first revealed, and David Dimbleby said, "We predict it will be Labour with a majority of 140 seats." I mean, extraordinary. Nobody had forecast that. And I remember saying to him, "How do you feel?" Because I was having to write all this up. And he said, "I feel nothing really. I mean, I'm just ready to get on to the next thing." When I first arrived at his home in Sedgefield, there was just the ordinary kind of policeman on the door. But by the time I left, and it was clear he was going to be Prime Minister, there were 5 or 6 men with machine guns patrolling in the gardens. And from that time onwards, I guess he never lived a normal life again. I remember going to dinner in Chequers in the summer after he was elected Prime Minister. And really almost the first warning sign I got was that they were discussing cabinet meetings. And Roy Jenkins was there. And in the 60s, when he'd been a cabinet minister, they were 2 hours on a Tuesday and 2 hours on a Thursday. And I remember Tony Blair saying, "Oh, we won't be doing that. It'll be 45 minutes once a week." And I remember Jenkins looking at him, and I looked at Roy, and it was the first moment that one thought, this is going to be a very personal one-man government. He often wore makeup. I mean, even when he wasn't in a television studio. I don't know why. I suppose maybe it just appealed to him, that sense of sort of always being a performer.
You don't pray together, for example?
No, we don't pray together, Jeremy, no.
Religious faith is very important to him, and I think that he developed a very Manichaean view of the world, of good and evil. When I saw that he had written to George Bush, "I am with you, whatever," it has the biblical connotation, you know, I will be with you even to the end. And so I think you can see there this sort of very personalised, very, well, for want of a better word, messianic kind of view about politics. As things went wrong, then he developed a kind of a masochism strategy that really almost reached its full flowering yesterday with the publication of the Chilcot Report. And that was almost like Christ nailed to the cross.
In that case,
with Tony Blair, you can never be quite sure where the public performance ends and the private man begins. But I felt there that perhaps there was a mixture of the two, that he was playing Christ on the cross, but also, in a way, in his soul, he is in anguish, and that he is morphed into this strange figure that is not any longer quite of this world. It's said that all prime ministers go mad after a time, and certainly Margaret Thatcher began to behave very erratically, but I don't think any has gone quite as strange, I'm afraid, as Tony Blair, simply because he started out so ordinary to begin with.
Robert Harris there. David Cameron, remember him? He didn't make much of it, and Alistair Campbell famously forbade Tony Blair to speak of his own faith in public, boldly stating, "We don't do God." But the next Prime Minister definitely does. Both contenders are practising Christians. Theresa May is a vicar's daughter, and Andrea Leadsom today declined to deny that she believed the Almighty had ever spoken to her directly. On the other side of the Atlantic, Christianity and right-wing politics often seem to combine to create homophobic rhetoric and ugly scenes outside abortion clinics. So could we see more of that over here? Or perhaps, instead, a kinder, more morally upright frame for politics influenced by the Christian religion? David Grossman has been considering the leadership rivals' articles of faith.
On 105.4 FM in London and across the UK on digital radio.
David Cameron once famously described his own Christian faith as rather like the reception of the London radio station Magic FM in the Chiltern Hills. It fades in and out, he said. But for a large number of the current crop of Conservative MPs, their faith is constant and it informs their politics. It's central to their political lives. And what's more, a large number of those who contested the Conservative leadership this time around say they are active Christians. The question is then, is this just a coincidence, or has something happened to the Conservative Party and its relationship with God and church?
There was, and I was part of it, there was an influential organisation still active in the Conservative Party today called the Conservative Christian Fellowship that did, over a long period, recruit churchgoers, went out to churches, Christian communities and said, get involved in politics. There may be an element of that work coming to fruition, but that work was certainly done before people like Theresa May applied to be Conservative Party members.
The frontrunner, Theresa May, is a vicar's daughter, and she says her faith is active and deep.
I think the point is that it is part of me. It is part of who I am and therefore how I approach things. I think it's right that we don't sort of flaunt these things here in British politics. But, you know, it is a part of me, it's there, and it obviously helps to frame my thinking and my approach.
The other contender still in the race, Andrea Leadsom, has come to her faith more recently and seems far more enthusiastic about discussing it.
I always try to ensure that I'm doing what I think God would want me to do. I don't mean that in the sense that I'm not responsible for what I'm doing, but I just try and keep in mind that, you know, that God's there and guiding my hands and helping me.
Andrea Leadsom is part of the all-party Christians in Parliament group who meet to pray and study the Bible together. The chairman of the group says Christian Conservatives in particular have had an image problem.
Frankly, over the last couple of decades, Christians on the right haven't helped ourselves by pinpointing a couple of issues and sometimes using very ugly language. And I think we're learning a lot that that's just not the way forward. It doesn't express the love of the God that we are seeking to follow at all. And we've got to get over that. And I don't blame people for thinking that we're hung up on one or two issues. That was the case a few years ago. I hope now that's increasingly not the case.
But those issues, abortion and particularly gay marriage, are important issues to many Conservative activists who will be picking the next Prime Minister. David Cameron drew a lot of criticism from his grassroots, legislating for gay marriage without it being in the party's manifesto. Today, Andrea Leadsom said she would have preferred the law not to have been changed.
I would have preferred for civil partnerships to be available to heterosexual and gay couples, and for marriage to have remained as a Christian service that was for men and women who wanted to commit in the eyes of God.
But crucially, Andrea Leadsom isn't proposing to change the law back. We are, it seems, a long way from the kind of religious right so active in American politics.
Well, to discuss this and the wider leadership race, I'm joined by the Conservative peer and commentator Danny Finkelstein, the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and Tim Montgomery of The Times, and also, of course, a star of the film we just saw. Tim, is religion having something of a resurgence in the Conservative Party?
I don't know if it's having a resurgence, but I welcome its overall influence. And if you look, for example, at Theresa May, some of the flagship reforms that she has pioneered against human trafficking, changing the stop and search laws that, you know, discriminated, targeted minority communities, particularly in London. I think, you know, that sort of moral purpose. The Conservatives used to talk largely about economic issues. It was more like a party of accountancy focus. And I think what some of the Christians in the Conservative Party have brought in is not an American right style politics, but it is a concern for bigger, more important moral issues. And I think it's overall very good. Andrea Leadsom and her interest in tackling the problems of very young children. She wants to much more spending on early intervention. She wants to reform CEO boardroom pay, which she thinks out of control.
They couldn't hold these views unless they went to church.
No, but I think there is an element sometimes in the coverage of Christians in politics that they are only interested in gay marriage or abortion. And actually, I think what happens with a lot of, if you go to a sermon in a church, It's as much likely to be on social justice issues, concern for the poor, and I think we're seeing those sort of Christians come to the front of the Conservative Party as well, who go week in, week out to hear those sermons in their churches.
Zoe, are you joining your hands in prayer at what Tim is saying?
I'm joining my hands in self-defence. Look, I'm an atheist, so all religions are equally ridiculous to me in politics, and the place of religion in politics is, I think, to create a kind of authoritarian frame where one person establishes their superiority over another, whether that's because they're heterosexual or because they think of themselves as more moral, is equally problematic in my view. And furthermore, the weird thing is that actually Christians in politics, the problem is they are obsessed with sex. It's all about homosexuality. It's all about abortion. If they were a little bit more into equality, which I thought was Jesus's big thing, then, then we'd be talking. The weird thing is, though, that, I don't keep abreast of major religions, and maybe honesty isn't such a big thing anymore, but I don't really take either of these women very seriously as people of faith when they're not very honest people. Leadsom famously all day long has been embellishing her CV, embellishing her achievements, embellishing her role in the financial sector.
She, of course, insists that she's done nothing of the sort.
Well, she actually called herself an investment manager, didn't she, when she was actually in HR at the time? I mean, she's not an honest person, I don't think, and so to kind of take her as a kind of realistic voice of Christianity in politics when it seems really strange.
You suggest a sort of picking and choosing. Danny Finkelstein, very briefly, isn't the problem here that if a politician is somehow allowed to say, well, God told me to do it, then all bets are off in terms of analysis and opposition?
People are allowed to have their own religious
Of
faith,
course.
and it's, a bizarre sort of metropolitan, by the way, to which I strongly belong, idea that people who are Christian are outlandish. I'm a Jew, obviously, and I've never experienced Christianity in the Conservative Party as an oppressive force. I think Tim's actually correct. It's interesting to me that what has definitely emerged, which is an increased Christian activism in the Conservative Party over the last 15 years, has gone alongside at the same time with increased social liberalism. Those two things have actually been able to coexist. And I just think we shouldn't try to look into people's souls and try to tell them what sort of faith that they have.
Let's not. Let's look entirely at the surface, because on the surface, of course, it's the gender, as we can see from tomorrow's front pages, it's the gender of the two leading candidates that the newspaper editors find most interesting this morning. Zoe Williams, do you dream of a day where we wouldn't even notice the fact that both candidates are women?
It's that day will be a long time coming. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary that the Conservative Party should deliver an all-female shortlist, having ridiculed the idea of all-female. Well, there was a kind of quite an interesting tweet from Janine Ganesh, which I really disagreed with, which was that the reason Conservatives are so good at women is that they don't obsess about identity politics in the way that people on the left do. And I don't agree with that. I think that this has occurred because of a bloodbath in a kind of so-called big piece to the Conservative Party. It was basically a public school stitch-up, and then they all turned on each other. It was like Lord of the Flies. And it just so happened that the only two people left at the end of that were both women. So the idea that they've just kind of, it's a triumph of deregulated free market politics that yields the result that the lefties would so dearly love to see, I think is wrong.
It's not proof of anything.
The reason why the left opposed votes for women was because they thought that women would vote Conservative. Emily Pankhurst ended up as a Tory candidate, and indeed that's true. For over a long period of history, the Conservative Party has done better among women than men, but it stopped doing that. And what I think a lot of modernisers have wanted to achieve is that it should do that again. And this is two things. One is a very encouraging development, but secondly, only a small development. The truth is, it does cover for the fact that we're still a long way away from equality for women in politics.
And I think because the Conservative women didn't come through all women shortlists, they actually had to fight for marginal seats. They had to go through the selection processes. I think they became much better politicians because they had to overcome all the obstacles, and sometimes more obstacles than the men face. Whereas I think some of the women that have come through the Labour Party haven't had that sort of same element of political guerrilla warfare that is necessary to win these constituency
For example?
fights. What, the Labour women and all-women shortlist?
Give us an example of a rubbish Labour woman who wouldn't have made it in the brutal Tory
The example I would give is the fact that you haven't got a woman leader still.
But that's not an example of a woman who isn't good enough, though,
whereas
right,
the Conservative Party has a whole stream of women coming forward now.
You don't seriously think these two women are the best politicians in the Conservative Party, do you?
Well, I think they...
Do you?
I think Theresa May...
Really?
is an incredibly impressive politician. She has survived in the Home Office brief.
You were backing Michael Gove at the weekend, I think.
And I was backing Boris Johnson a week ago.
Okay.
And he would have been my choice.
Go for the hat-trick. Who are you backing now?
I don't
More
know.
like David Cameron.
I am very glad that we are now about to have a 2-month contest, because I have no idea what Theresa May thinks about, for example, Sajid Javid's very interesting idea to borrow £100 billion for infrastructure, which is the kind of policy I think we need to address some of the
But you should have backed Stephen Crabb.
challenges.
Weren't some of the Labour women suggesting that at the last general election?
I think they were suggesting borrowing on every single front.
Well,
that was
still,
the Labour.
it's a big sum of money.
This is a more sensible, targeted way of
It's
increasing investment.
exactly the same. It just came from a Tory. That's the only difference.
By it, actually, at all. I think the Conservative Party has got a number of very good women, and it's very good that we've got 2 women in, but that shouldn't disguise the fact that the Conservative Party and British politics is a long way away from achieving equality for women in politics.
That is, this is not because you're a woman, sorry. That is absolutely...
You're mansplaining.
Go on then,
to
very
me.
quickly.
Well, the point is, not all women are feminists, and these 2 women, neither of these 2 women will improve the lot of women in this country. So,
Zoe Williams, Danny Finkelstein, Tim Montgomery, many thanks indeed. And that is all that we have time for. Good night.
Hello there, there's not much